Emma calling in from Virginia there. All three of us will be covering different parts of this presentation as we get through it. The title of the presentation is on the slide here, Building a Framework for Water Quality Data Collection, Analysis and Application Serving Lake and Non-Lake Communities. Turn it over to Grace to start off with a little introduction, or if you can hit the next slide. Who we are. Well, I'll do this first. I've hit it a couple times, thanks to that. So, NY EnviroCom is a nonprofit I founded a few years ago. Grace is pretty much a co-founder, and we also fiscally sponsor a group, Deer Park Rural Alliance, which she had founded, which existed previously, but was never incorporated as a nonprofit. We're an environmental land use focused nonprofit. We work in the Hudson and Delaware River watersheds. We have current projects in Orange, Sullivan, and Ulster counties. That's our main area of focus. Though many of the projects could be applied equally to other areas, but that's where we have the time and the resources to work on. Yeah, right. And our programs, we have programs focused on advocacy, that includes policy, and then monitoring both for applications in the advocacy policy as well as for general scientific interest and community usage.
I'm here under 2 or 3 hats, I guess. I'm an officer of Guymard Lake, which is also known as Lake Guymard. Yes. And which is a man-made lake created in 1858 by my great-grandfather and his brothers, very entrepreneurial Huguenot descendants, where Emma's going to be speaking about the CSLAP program on it. I'm just giving you a sort of location geography where in our lake empties into the Neversink River. Our focus, Deer Park Rural Alliance, is in the town of Deer Park in Mount Hope, and our focus is on the Neversink and the Bashakil, and we're all part of the Neversink watershed. That said, we can think of the lake as all lakes are, with an input and an outflow. The outflow is directly a mile downhill to the Neversink. We will give you some CSLAP information, and then we'll start on the larger project that our lake is tied in with the other work that we're doing. All right.
Those are a few of the volunteers who collected this information. We'll go to the next slide, and then we'll
one of whom is here today.
Take it over me if we look at it a couple times. So we have some basic information about Guymard Lake there. I'll turn it over to Emma to start introducing.
Okay. Hi, my name is Emma. I've been working with New York EnviroCom since January of this year. My background is in biology and geology, and I've worked on a couple of aquatic monitoring projects. So I'm happy to be here virtually. I wish I could be there in person, but this works. And yeah, so Guymard Lake is monitored through the DEC's CSLAP program. You can see the watershed is 275 acres total. On the map, it's outlined in black. It's primarily a forested watershed. The size of the lake is 32 to 35 acres. Its maximum depth is 14 feet, and on average it's 7 feet deep, and the water retention time is about 0.4 years. On the slide it says that the lake classification is a B, but we recently learned that it has been bumped up to an A. So now on to the next slide. We're going to be discussing 2019 data from Guymard Lake, and that's the most recent data we have at the moment. So Guymard Lake continues to be mesoeutrophic or moderately to highly productive based on having moderate water clarity and moderate algae levels measured through chlorophyll A, and has high nutrient levels of phosphorus. So its moderate water clarity can be attributed to the introduction of Brazilian Elodea back in 2006. Infestations of this aquatic invasive species can alter ecosystems by trapping sediment and degrading water quality, and it also inhibits water flow and is a bit of a difficulty for recreational activities as well. So Heartlake is moderately susceptible to periodic harmful algal blooms, and as you probably know, they are a problem throughout New York State. They occur due to an excess of nutrients or low water and warm water temperatures. The situation at Heartlake has improved over the past few years, but this problem is widespread and difficult to tackle. So, next slide. So we're going to be talking about the harmful algal blooms in 2019. Along the shoreline, there were 5, and these were composed primarily of microcystis. And on the bottom right, the figure is showing the open water algae samples, and we have the dominant taxa of algae is green algae. And so although the microcystis toxin levels were above the EPA low-risk drinking water criteria, the water was still safe enough for swimming, and that is the primary use of the lake for recreation, so that is what we're looking to maintain. So moving on to the next slide, I'm going to talk about some of the long-term trends at Heartlake Lake. So on the top left, we have water clarity over time, and it's measured using a Secchi disk. And in 2019, water clarity has decreased more than it has ever in the past, making the lake into the eutrophic status in terms of water clarity. And that is likely due to what we're going to look at in the chart on the top right, chlorophyll A, measuring algal biomass. In 2019, chlorophyll A was higher than it ever was previously as well, so it was a very productive year. On the bottom left, we have total phosphorus over time, and fortunately it does look like total phosphorus has recovered to its baseline since its spike in 2013. So it's likely that the nutrient levels are not what's causing the increase in phytoplankton biomass. It's what we're going to be looking at in the figure on the bottom right, which is temperatures of typical surface water temperatures compared to the 2019 surface water temperatures, and we can see that overall temperatures were higher compared to previous years, and that is probably why it was more productive than usual. And so that is the story at Heartlake, but to get a better idea of the bigger picture of water quality in the overall region, we want to look at things on a watershed level. So many of our waterways are interconnected, and it's important to look at the whole story so that we can really see what's going on. And so I'm going to move on to the next slide and shift the focus over to the water quality monitoring program that New York Environment has implemented. We have installed 6 conductivity, temperature, and depth sensors along the lower Bashakil, with the goals of documenting fundamental baseline conditions for these parameters so we can monitor overall stream health. We'll go into more detail in the coming slides on why we're looking at conductivity, depth, and temperature. So the photo is what our sensors look like. The sensors are maintained and checked regularly by a group of dedicated volunteers in the local community. EnviroDIY provides a data logger that passively uploads the data that our sensors record up to an interface for data visualization called Monitor My Watershed, where volunteers and members of the community can log on to and check updates as they please.
Let me interrupt just for a moment. These sensors, the sensor itself is $500. The whole structure, with the box and the computer and everything in it, comes to about $500 to $1,200. The total is about $1,000 to $1,200 per sensor, per station.
And how many stations?
We have 6 stations going. We've had, that's basically what we have, and
Yeah,
we're
well,
expanding.
that'll be in the next slide.
In the next
With
one.
recommendations on like spacing out and that?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, so we go to the next
Next
slide.
slide. Go on,
So
please.
this is, I think, the.
Continue.
Yeah, so there's
Okay.
so Emma, if you want.
Yes, so our 6 sensors are pretty much clumped down here on the map. You can see that is where the lower Bashkill and the Neversink River converge. We have 6 of them, and they continuously have been logging data since August 2020. It's all within the Delaware River watershed, and it's located in Orange County near the border of Sullivan County. So moving on to the next slide, we're going to discuss why we're collecting conductivity and what conductivity is. Conductivity can be used as a general measure of water quality. It's a measure of the water's ability to pass electrical current, and it's measured in microsiemens per centimeter, which is a unit of electrical current per centimeter of water. Dissolved salts and other inorganic chemicals conduct electrical current, and conductivity increases as salinity of the water increases. All water bodies have a unique and relatively constant range of conductivity that, once established, can be used as a baseline for comparison with regular conductivity measurements. Significant changes in conductivity could then be an indicator that some source of pollution or discharge has entered the waterway, but you can only identify these inflows once you have insight to what your baseline conditions are. So as you can see, we are well on our way to determining a baseline for at least a few of our sites. And we're going to move on to depth now on the next slide. So depth is, collecting water depth information is also a useful tool for determining stream discharge and picking up a precipitation signal, so we can also try to determine the fate and transport of pollutants in the water if and when they occur. Yeah, we have, for 3 of our sites, a pretty good baseline that we're developing, and we're getting there for the other sites. The sensors go offline sometimes, but it's an issue that we are working out and sorting out. So moving on to the next slide for temperature. And we're trying to get baseline temperature data as well, because it's helpful when trying to delineate a point source of pollution. High water temperatures is also part of the recipe for harmful algal blooms, so keeping an eye on source water temperatures for a particular lake or water body can provide a warning signal before it happens. And also, monitoring water temperature is important for cold water trout species that require cool water temperatures for survival, so to keep an eye on that. It's useful as well. And what we have so far, we have a nice clear seasonal signal coming through for at least sites 2 and 3, and we're working out everything else for the other sites. Another thing on the next slide, moving on to the next slide, we're monitoring macroinvertebrates. We have a professor from SUNY Orange, Dr. Walter Yan, volunteering and collecting macroinvertebrate samples with his students. Last year was a preliminary year of data collection, and the 2 bar charts show the abundance of macroinvertebrates from each time that they sampled. In June, they sampled the site in Cuddybackville, and the water scored excellent, and that was based on the species present. And then also in July, they sampled at Horseshoe Bend, where they got a score of near excellent. Just this past early April this year, he sampled again, and due to the time of year, there were less species present, but 3 of the 5 species present were indicative of good to excellent water quality, so high water quality of the stream has thankfully been maintained over the winter. And so to do that, he uses leaf packs, and those are you can access those so that you can just order them and get them. And yeah, it's a very user-friendly sampling method. So next slide. Bottle tests are another part of the framework that we have incorporated as well. We had a volunteer visually observe a consistent accumulation of water pooling beside the Bashkill near one of our monitoring locations. It was more persistent than just some stormwater runoff, so it became apparent that we needed to add additional parameters like bottle tests to send into a lab to determine if pollutants were present. The conductivity, temperature, and depth sensors are able to give us an overall picture of what's going on and what typical conditions should look like, but adding a bottle test can give you some more detailed information for when things are out of the normal and out of the ordinary. So the bottle tests from that accumulation of water on the side of the Bashkill have tested positive for fecal coliform and nitrate, and now more recently, the Bashkill itself has also tested positive for fecal coliform. So this is a wastewater runoff that's being directed into the Bashkill. And next slide. This is an application of how our data set is being put to use. The wastewater that's draining into the Bashkill is in violation of the Clean Water Act, and following the bottle tests, a lawsuit is underway.
All right, I'll just jump in to give you that.
Okay.
So this is kind of, so the application of it, now we're getting the application. So on the advocacy side, obviously when you can find pollution, then it gives you data that you can use to address the source of pollution, which is what we're using in this Clean Water Act lawsuit here because of that fecal coliform, which we first started observing, almost 2 years ago. So 2 years accuracy of data, that's been enough that our legal team felt we had enough to proceed and take action to try to address this problem. So we're going to the next slide. And then we get to the objectives of why we're doing this program. And if we go back to everything we've talked about is both for that scientific interest and helping people understand what's going on, and then having the tools when you do find something to take some kind of action so that you're not just looking at it and you're able to actually try to remedy it and try to make improvements, whatever. I mean, every case is different, but does that. So you need to build a framework that gives you that gives you, that platform, it gives you that foundation where you can collect data in the right way so that you're not just doing it for years and there's no end point to, there's no what's the reason, what's the use, and all that. And that all comes from the framework. So there's a couple things in here, right? So how do we build that framework? Well, first you need your objectives, which of course is starting baseline. Because you can go out to the river and be like, it doesn't look good, and it may not be good, but that doesn't mean anything. There's nothing behind it. So you need a baseline of conditions, which you can only get from data. And that takes time. It's not that you see some day and you go out there one day, and that means that can mean a lot of things. But if you're there, like we are through the stations, through that monitored over time, then you have that and you can see the changes. And if they're persistent, if they're one-off, if they're ongoing, all that will be revealed through that. And that comes down to your framework, which again is documenting and comparing your current conditions, documenting the biological communities, knowing when it's a weather-related issue or whether it's a issue related to human action.
May I just say that the figuring out what is going on is asking the questions, collecting data. Moral outrage does not get you very far in terms of correcting problems with your intake, your lakes, your streams. So the big thing, and we started out as an ad hoc group because of a huge change in zoning, and an urban facility plunked down on the mountain with massive violations and pollution. So I would recommend that if you have a problem, you define it as best you can, and then realize that you will need to raise money to get experts. That's the hydrogeologist, the
And of course, these
limnologist.
experts will need data
They will
to
need
make
data.
their evaluations on. Even if you're an expert, if you don't have data, he doesn't have much to work with. You know, whether that's for regulatory, for civil purposes, for scientific purposes.
And for
they'll need data.
informing the community and your municipalities, because the things that are happening to streams and rivers now are accelerating. The pressure is on. Sedimentation, salt. Sedimentation has its own DNA. And so all of these pressures, everybody in your group, your volunteer group, can everybody look at a different problem and communicate.
Into the next
All
slide.
right, next.
Of course. So we'll just hit a few questions. So as we mentioned, ask the questions. You know, is the quality declining? Is it due to severe weather? Is it due to other factors? Is it vulnerable to climate change and human action? How can you make it more resilient? What's needed? Road maintenance. That can be a big issue.
That's a
depending where you are.
solvenization.
Next slide. Good. So, how do we design this study? Well, first you need some volunteers or staffers. You know, volunteers are better unless you have a huge budget. And you need a location. What's the area you want to work on? Where are you concerned? And what are the boundaries of that area?
Keeping with volunteers, keep them happy. Have parties, have fun doing it. It should not just be drudge.
So, what do you need to measure? What do you think is going on, and what measurements, what factors are going to give you insight to what's going on? This may need to be adjusted. You may think one thing's when you start measuring, and then you find there's not much that, and then you need to start measuring something else until you find the things that give you the indicators. You know, that requires some fine tuning, but you got to start somewhere. Determine your time frame, how often are you collecting this data. With us, you know, it's a few different things, you know, the bottle testing that requires someone to go out. So that's, you know, once a month, maybe every 3 weeks in the busy time. Whereas with the data loggers, those are on all the time. They're getting data every 5 minutes. So we have a combination of both constant, almost minute, you know, it's hour by hour data, as well as, you know, periodic month by month or week by week data, and those interact with each other, obviously.
That's the fun part, going with people, getting boots in the stream, realizing that you need to have shade trees over an area because streams are getting too warm. Trout can only deal with a certain heat, and the upper Delaware is getting warmer and warmer. I mean, and the Neversink is one of the premier trout streams in the United States.
And of course, for this data to be valuable long term, you know, people are going to ask, how did you collect it? How did you verify it? How did you, you know, you're going to need to develop a quality control of some sort on that. You're cleaning your sensors, your process for doing it, and all that, just so that, you know, people accept the validity of it. So that's definitely, you know, it might not be a thing you do day one of the program, but pretty early in it.
Yeah, have a good note taker.
And then, how do you analyze? What do you do with this data? How do you analyze? Are you analyzing it? Are you sending it to someone to analyze it? How is it presented? What's your usage? Who's the target or the consumer of this data? Those are all things you need to think about. And then,
Thanks.
yeah, so briefly, you know, other things we're doing with this, we won't go too much into this, but, you know, some of the Monticello School District is introducing it. Interested in doing environmental literacy programs, so things like this can be applied to that. They're good for kids to get a baseline. They're good for job skills, you know, in the environmental field and all that. So beyond what you do in your group, you can also work with other members of the community to tailor some of that stuff for them. Some of this can be adapted to courses where they can learn it and they can apply it to other things, you know, whether their job or their interests.
There are lots of jobs that are developing out of all of this work. Some with high school students, some with interns, some with the young people that we have are among our first hires who have a real sense of what is what's important in the environment. whether it's drone work.
Of course,
Yeah.
you know, general outreach and supporting other groups. You know, you may have another group nearby that has similar things, concerns or interests, and can benefit from that. So it's always good to have, you know, a framework that can be shared with other groups so that even, you know, beyond your own usage can be applied broader and have a broader benefit. Go to the next slide. Yeah, that's part of the thing. We'll get into that. Questions, you know, we'll acknowledge our NYSFOLA for hosting us. Stroud Water Research Centers provided a lot of support again in our program. So
I highly
of course, our
recommend
volunteers,
Stroud.
the Guy Marlake Association,
Stroud
our
of
staff.
Freshwater Research
That's our contact
Center.
info.
Yes.
Anyone has any questions, they can email us or go on the website. You can reach us through there. We also have some brochures and cards we can give you on the way out. We're happy to discuss any of this with anyone who's interested at any time. Just drop us a line.
The whole deal is that as there are more and more pressures on your lakes, your lake systems, the watershed, we traditionally stayed very close to the lake, Guymard Lake. Now it's like getting up into the streams, getting up into the ponds, seeing what's happening either naturally or building. Sedimentation and non-point pollution are very big issues. We have not gotten to the core of our phosphorus. There are many potential causes for that, some deep within the lake, but all of it's prioritizing and not attempting to do everything at once. But as you find you get one set of data and you feel successful on that, go on to another. It's very critical that you think long-term on all of these issues. Some of your problems will be solved by giving attention to septic systems, things that are very obvious, but many of them will require remediation on embankments. And everybody loves to go out and plant trees. The problem, many of those initiatives are fail because there's little maintenance on them.
And also they're kind of one of the
One-offs.
one-off things aren't gonna, you know, do much
Save-
for the
save-
You want it doesn't have to be the biggest program, but you want something that can be done and can keep being done over a long term, and that can be built on to really make a difference. Because, you know, plant trees is good, but that's one day thing. So, any questions, comments, feedbacks?
Yes.
Have you implemented any remediation or mitigation projects?
Actually, not on the screen. We're still in the testing mode, but there's some issues up at Guymard Lake and where I live, and that will be discussed in our spring meeting before we have our annual meeting. And we do have people, we started water testing back in the 60s. I'm proud to say my father was an initiator. And we are looking at other aspects. We have Brazilian allodia, which is Egeria densa. We're one of the first in New York State to have it.
And of course, we hope, you know, example with the clean water lawsuit with that. Part of that, if we're successful, which we hope, you know, we'll get that, there would ideally be a remediation component of that, whether it's a supplemental environmental. A lot of times in that, if the court determines that, you know, it's a valid, that it's happening and it needs to be remediated, they will mandate funding for a supplemental environmental project, which would take place over a certain amount of years to remediate that. So that would be the end result. You collect the data, you take an action, and then hopefully that action results in the resources for the remediation at the end point of it. So,
Yes.
Can you see pre and post data, since you have some robust data with that urban facility? Like, can you tie it to the timing of that urban facility that you were discussing earlier?
Yes, it's tied through We were not testing back in 2006 when all of the building was going on, but we have DEC records,
So you have
DEC
baseline.
violations,
Yeah.
plus we have building inspection, and we have photographic evidence.
I mean,
of-
this is something that's been
Yeah.
going on for, before this, and even though the clean water obviously is limited to the cauliflower stuff in the water, but there's, you know, there's been other just construction runoff
Construction
that have been
runoff.
documented that are all
Yeah.
symptoms of the same
Yes.
pattern.
An outflow
Various
from
things.
our lake halfway down the mountain. There was a lot of.
I mean, our data set is broader than, you know, we cover range beyond that, but, you know, we can definitely isolate certain sets of that data to incidents that are that it's very unlikely they would have come from somewhere else just on the patterns, you know, I mean, of course, there's a process legally and going that with experts and all that, but, you know, judging on the basis from other areas that haven't seen the same thing to where it's there, and then farther down the river and that where, you know, you can see there's a difference in the areas and obviously geographic, who the neighbors are and all that.
It's looking at everything.
Yeah, it's a process, you know, it's an ongoing process, so. All right, well, thank you all for coming out.
Thank you for coming.
Good to speak to you. Thank you.
We'll be out in the
All right,
lobby.
Emma.